creating connecting corridors for bikes and pedestrians. Its goal is to make pathways that encourage Ottumwa residents to walk, to run, to bike, to go from their neighborhoods to the park, to the school, to the trails, and to have a safe facility and create a healthy community. The city staff, the Trails Council, and the Planning Commission met several times in the winter and spring to develop this plan. The group looked at locations of the existing trail system, of the parks, the schools, and destinations. We looked at where major commercial centers were. We looked at major employment centers. We looked at high-density housing. We identified corridors along city streets to create bicycle and pedestrian connections through neighborhoods. We prioritized our corridors kind of to create a backbone, and we based anticipated project, and we kind of ranked them based on where the city was planning future street improvements to facilitate where to anticipate projects. And we developed a set of standards for improvements. So kind of there was, a set, so that all the trails would have be similar width, similar depth. The improvements will consist of a network of 8-foot side paths and 6-foot sidewalks constructed on one side of the street within the existing right-of-way. This will create a safe set of pathways through neighborhoods for bikes and pedestrians. These side paths and sidewalks can be constructed as the city makes street improvements in the same corridor. We believe there are grants such as the Transportation Alternative Program or the also the STBG TAP Flex program, which these are both federal transportation grants to provide that can help provide funding for such sidewalk and trails. There's also through Wellmark, the Healthy Communities and Match grants. And the Wapello County Trails Council has also indicated that they may assist with providing funding for some sections. The first map, which is on the screen right now, and I also handed out copies to all of you, shows the priority 1, which would be kind of the first or highest priority for the north side of the city. This shows North Court Street, which would serve as the backbone or kind of the primary starting point for the north side. It would be the primary north-south route. Improvements to North Court Street would consist of a 8-foot side path constructed along one side of the street. By constructing this first, it would create a connection to downtown, to the trail system. And as I said, it would create a backbone or spine that then later on other trails, other side paths, other sidewalks could be connected to at a later date. And then the second map here shows the priority 1 corridors on the south side of the city. This shows Milner Street would serve as the backbone on the or the primary north-south route for the south side. Improvements to Milner Street would consist of an 8-foot side path constructed along one side of Milner Street. Another priority 1 corridor on the south side would be Mary Street. Improvements to Mary would consist of a 6-foot widened sidewalk constructed along one side of Mary Street. And then the third map, we're going back to the north side here. This is kind of to give you an idea of the full build out, or shows you all the corridors for the north side. In addition to the priority 1 corridor along North Court Street, which would have been our backbone, we identified some additional corridors, some priority 2. These would include Carter Avenue, Park Avenue, so like going out to the college, going along Park Avenue, going along Pennsylvania Avenue, and going along 4th Street. Some priority 3 corridors, which would go along East Alta Vista, and then like a secondary north-south route going along Elm Street and Iowa Avenue. You also notice there are a couple areas marked existing corridor. These are areas where no improvements will be made. This is because they are not necessary or can't be made. One of these is on North Court Street, south of 6th. This is because the sidewalks are already 10 feet wide, and so no improvement is necessary. Or there's an area on Pennsylvania, which would be between Jefferson and Elm, which is because there's the slope there, there's no space for additional sidewalk. And then the 4th map shows all of the corridors on the south side. So in addition to the priority 1 routes along Milner and Mary Street, we have priority 2 corridors that we identified on North Quincy, Albia Road, Finley Avenue, Ferry Street, and Sheridan. Priority 3 routes on Wildwood, and a priority 4 route on Albia Road west of Wildwood, and then on William Street. And this isn't just a one and done kind of where we just created a plan and throw it out there and give it to the city. The city staff, the Trails Council, and the Planning Commission intend to meet annually prior to the city developing its capital improvements program each year. We feel that this will allow the group to review this plan and the upcoming city's upcoming street projects. The group can then, determine if there are any street projects along any of the routes we identified and discuss whether bicycle and pedestrian improvements can be made at the same time, whether, sidewalks can be integrated into the street project at the same time. So kind of costs can be shared and minimized. And at the same time, we can discuss funding options for those improvements if sidewalk improvements can be incorporated. So if, grants can be sought and pursued so that the costs to the city are kept at a minimum. In conclusion, I'd like to say that the bike and pedestrian plan for the city will create pathways to healthy neighborhoods, that it will provide connectivity for bikes and pedestrians to trails, to schools and parks, that it'll provide safe areas for non-motorized transportation, that I ask that you consider supporting this plan, allowing it to be integrated into future city plans, including the city's next comprehensive plan, and that you continue letting city staff meet, work with us and the Trails Council annually as part of a continuing bicycle and pedestrian planning process.
Council, any questions?
Yeah, I'd make a comment, Bob. I'm a big fan of cycling. I know you can't tell it by looking, but I am. And I know one of the reasons that, a lot of folks who bike like to go, first of all, they like to travel, 20, 30 miles, get in there, ride during the day. And the trails are awesome right now, but they usually have to loop around. This is going to provide not only safety for people getting back and forth from school, but it's going to give a chance to ride as much as you want, which a lot of people I know in this town are interested in. A second thing is I was reading a Des Moines Register article here not too long ago about trails and what they do to neighborhoods. And apparently they were getting the impression that they were actually raising property values, and people were actually looking for bike and trailheads as a way to search for their next home. And so that's something we desperately need to. And if anything can help and we can work, staff can work with you. And I fully support this 100%. So thanks for coming and giving the presentation. Mm-hmm. Very well.
Thanks, man. Anyone else? Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Just one comment again, Chris. We appreciate the time and effort you put into this. I think it's worth noting for the council members and those in the audience, as he indicated, there are a number of people that worked on this. You mentioned Jody Gates, Gene Ratchey, Steve Siegel in the back contributed certainly. As I recall, and correct me if I'm mistaken, but we want to make sure and point out one item to council. The 4 priority areas are just that. Those are what staff recommends as priority. There was a large number of projects. In fact, I remember one of them even involved the Harris Branch to the west. So there was a very large number. Council can make those obviously legislative decisions about which one of these they want to fund. We felt, I think I can speak for those of us that served in that committee, I forgot to mention Larry Seals, but for those of us that served on the committee, we wanted there to be connectivity, in addition to that, to try and bring some sidewalks and trails to the north end of town. One of the items, though, Chris, I'd like to follow up with you on, and you and I talked about this earlier today, and that is the sidewalk trail work follow street reconstruction. If there is a given period of time, let's just say for the sake of discussion, that the street programs for 1 or 2 year period don't lend themselves to putting in, quite frankly, new sidewalks. Mm-hmm. If that is the case, will the program be, for lack of a better term, held back or put in suspended animation until such time as you do see street reconstruction? If not, I would hope from a staff perspective anyway, you would still see the city moving forward seeking grant money to undertake sidewalk trail work, even if we don't have street reconstruction work going on. Mr. Mayor, just asked that Mr. Kukla speak to that question.
I mean, I think, we'd still want to meet regularly, even if there's not a project every year, to identify projects farther out. At least on the federal side, it takes several years to identify funding. Some of the federal funding sources are several years out. You need to get your project in line to get in the sequence, so that you can capture that funding and pull it in, just because the federal dollars are limited. So you do want to identify a project several years in advance and get the application in and get that funding secured in many cases.
And Mr. Mayor, just one other point on the funding aspect of this, Chris, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but is it fair to say when you look at the trail work that was done that Councilman Dalby referred to, I imagine there was a fairly significant portion of that came from the state. I know Gene Ratchey and I have talked about this. So there was some funding on the state level. Typically, if we're talking about the larger sidewalks, the pedestrian, the sidewalks you can walk and jog on, they're typically 8 to 10 feet in width. Would these be candidates for funding through the state, or this largely because they run through neighborhoods, as an example, a lot of them do, would they not be candidates for that funding? I don't know if they were, I believe they were REAP grants at the time. I don't know, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm just curious whether or not a REAP grant, whether these sidewalks that would go through residential neighborhoods would be candidates for the REAP grant.
Mm-hmm. I don't believe many of these sidewalks would be candidates for REAP grants, because for a REAP, you'd have to tie it into natural resources. So you'd have to tie it into like seeing like certain natural flowers or wildlife. But I do believe you could tie it into certain Department of Transportation, federal or state grants. Like I mentioned, the Transportation Alternatives Grant is a DOT grant, or the TAP/STBG grant is another Department of Transportation grant. And there may be another one I can't name off the top of my head. That's a department.
That's fine. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Chris, like Matt, my wife and I do a bit of biking, and we're just so impressed with what the trails and everybody working together has done with the loops on the south side and along the levees and so forth. But I also noticed from your maps to take North Court and the width of it, and to identify then this could be biking, pedestrian, and so forth, even though some of it may need to be resurfaced here. in the near future. But, and then you also mentioned Pennsylvania, which was done, and so that lends itself. You mentioned East Alta Vista, and I was curious, I don't see it, but maybe it's just I don't see it. From East Alta Vista, from North Court to Elm is good, but from Elm east to Indian Hills, was that part of your consideration? Was it any part of the priority?
He said East. I believe it's there on.
And the reason I ask is that piece, in fact, as it gets down to the bottom to Indian Hills, then the county has identified quite a few miles of biking area on out in the county. So
Yeah, I believe we have it identified there on this map. I believe it's a lower level.
okay, yes, okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming. Anyone else from the council? Mark?
I know this might be a little bit of a premature question, but you had mentioned that this would be something that we'd want to consider as part of the comprehensive plan of the city. As a broad stroke, how long of a plan do you think this would be? A 10-year plan, a 20-year plan?
Like to implement all this?
To implement it, complete it?
I think it'd probably be like like a 20-year plan maybe.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this was just a consideration, information for consideration. So once again, thank you for the information. Okay, Sherry, item 6.
Blackbird Investments presentation, Alta Vista property. Receive presentation, discuss, and provide comments.
Okay, and City Administrator Andy Morris is going to introduce those persons, please.
Very well. Thank you, Mayor. Justin Doyle from Blackbird Investments is with us this evening to give us a presentation of the Alta Vista project. And Mayor would ask at this point that I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay.
Is that my cue? It's okay. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you so much for having me. With me this evening is also TJ Jacobs, one of the partners of Blackbird, and James Spiller, just a wave that works, who is in head of the charge of our design group within Blackbird, also a licensed architect. As was introduced, my name is Justin Doyle. I am president of Blackbird Investments. I wanted to start off by zooming way back to the past with this, and it was February of 2014. It was a very, very cold Tuesday morning. I think the high was like -2 that morning, and we met out at the St. Joseph site with Mayor Lazio, I think 5 staff members, all 5 of the Blackbird partners, and part of our staff to walk the building. And we were very surprised to have the full contingent, not only Mayor Lazio, but also the full staff. And we were even more surprised to notice that they were apparently unaware it was -2 degrees and the building was unheated. And so they walked with us for several hours as we investigated the site. Something that we typically do in the winter is we try to find opportunities and places. If you can find a diamond in the rough in the middle of February in Iowa, you can pretty much find it anywhere. And so that was a very important introduction that we had to the city of Ottumwa and to the building, the site in particular, because a community that is willing to put that level of energy and attention into a difficult site, difficult project, is a city that has the political will and the desire and the structure to be able to make really difficult things get accomplished. And that's what Blackbird does. Blackbird takes very difficult opportunities and turns them into successes. That's why we formed this corporation. All 5 of the partners came from different careers, different lines of work before this. And a couple of the items that some of you may be familiar with, especially after reading some of the paper over the weekend, I want to talk about is the Fort Des Moines site up in Des Moines, which was abandoned since the 1980s. We bought it 4 years ago. We paid cash for the site. And it took us 4 years to get the construction started. It was a $40 million project. Large undertaking. We went through a variety of very difficult tax credit programs that expired, change in political leadership. Just when we thought we had everything going, the bond market blew up around the election due to economic uncertainty. And so we had to regroup and start again. And that project is an example of having to wade through a variety of unforeseen problems, work around them, and get to the finish line. And the finish line is worth going through all of that pain and that suffering and the financial expense we did. Another project here in Des Moines, we're celebrating a week from Thursday night, the grand opening of the Yonkers Tea Room, which was closed in 2005. Another development company had owned it for 7 years, working on getting it through the development process, only to have the darn thing burned down 2 months into construction. We bought it from that crew and spent the time and the energy to rehabilitate a burnt out building, because it is absolutely worth it for the community. It's something that so many people have memories of, and it's the reason why we wake up in the morning and we do what we're doing at Blackbird. So difficult things take tenacity, they take energy, they take time, and that's why the marriage between the city of Ottumwa and Blackbird, I think, is exactly the right cocktail that results in success. That's been our corporate experience. As I mentioned before, on the Fort Des Moines and the Yonkers, Wilkins site, and all the other projects, when Blackbird makes a decision that we're going to do something, we wake up in the morning, we gather all the dollars, we go out, we buy the site, very first thing we do, and then we full throttle jump in. And that doesn't mean that the path that we start in on is the path where we finish, but it means that we are fully committed from the beginning. The Regional Care St. Joseph site is a little bit unique, and this is the only site of all of the projects that Blackbird has in development construction that we don't own. This is something that I think was missed in some of the recent media reports. This site is still currently owned by a private corporation. It is not something we have control over, but despite that, we have spent to date over $450,000 of cash in the pursuit of this through environmental reports, estimators, architects, engineers, market study, appraisers, and everything that went into the multiple years of pursuit that this project is. Not to mention the hundreds, if not thousands of hours of Blackbird staff has already spent on this. And this has been a very long time, and I don't enjoy having long development projects. It's a drain on our organization. It frustrates people, it frustrates neighbors, and I'm amazed that the neighbors have tolerated that site being in that condition for as long as they already have. But in my experience, it takes that type of energy and that type of commitment in order to make something like the St. Joe's site turn into something greater. So what I want to talk about tonight, and I'm going to introduce, well, I guess James has already been introduced, but James is going to walk through the design proposal that we have. Again, this is something for a site that we don't own, we don't control, but under good faith, we believe that we'll be able to work out those challenges with the acquisition of the site. And it gives a good example of what happens when you are committed to something and you work so hard at it, when roadblocks come up, like the case of rehabilitation of St. Joe's, where we determined that the cost that went into it was not able to be supported in any type of reasonable return on investment. And if we were to rehabilitate St. Joe's, it would have fallen so far short and would have required us to rely on tax credit programs that I don't believe the neighborhood would be fully supportive with regards to income restriction for residents. So we have regrouped, we've redirected, and we've been working on this for quite a while, and I think you're going to be very pleased with what we see. And so with that, I wanted to hand it over to James to start the discussion, and then I'm very happy to answer any questions in a little while that I can help out with. Thank you.
Good evening, council members. Thanks for hosting us. We're passing out hard copies of the presentation that I'll be walking all of you through. Again, this is an open dialogue, so if there's a lack of clarity on any information, please let me know, and I'll be happy to share. So I'll wait till everybody at least has it in hand. We might have an extra copy or two, so I'll let you fight over it. All right, so it should be the exact same presentation I'm showing digitally here for the citizens and the public. So just to identify where we are, this is East Alta Vista, running from west to east. On the north side, we have Ash Street and Elm, and we are just south of the Country Club. So everybody should be pretty familiar with this site, but just to make sure everybody is correctly oriented. So north is up. So this is the existing site as is. You can see the size of the existing structure and the affiliated structures on the site, and the sizable footprint of the existing parking lot relative to the neighborhood to the west, the neighborhood to the northeast, the neighborhood to the south and to the east. So in this particular scenario, we've worked through, as Justin Doyle identified, the cost, the prohibitive cost in rehabilitating the existing structure. And so here we're just letting everybody understand the size of the site. It is approximately 10 acres. And this is showing you really the historic Circle Drive, and just to keep that as a sort of a moment of scale to understand the proposal that we are making. So this is an image identifying the historic fabric and reacting to the historic fabric. The neighborhood to the west is the Vogel Historic District. This is a pretty landmark district in this city. And you can see its size of street, its setbacks, its relative scale of housing is fairly dense compared to the eastern neighborhood, which is established maybe 30 years later, right? So you can see a clear difference in density. The street layouts are different, and there are alleyways. So the first understanding of the site as we see it is to respond and pull in the historic district fabric. So to maintain a similar scale and feel as the historic district. Similarly, you can see the road to the north-south. That is to extend upon existing roads and respond to additional traffic patterns that one would see in this area. You'll see some of those jogs from the streets that effectively mirror the alleyways. I'll explain those momentarily. So this is the concept massing of the particular proposal. What we are looking at here identifies, I believe this has a laser. Yeah, you can barely see it. So what we're identifying here is a common green. So the idea is effectively, we have to take down a structure that hosts lots of memories of the city. It's a place that people were born. It's a place that people spent time and were ill at. And it's a place that has a lot of cultural memory. We understand that, and we're sensitive to that. We don't like where the finances have taken us on this project, but there are hard realities to what the current condition is. So with this cultural sensitivity and understanding, and from our point of view, there needs to be something that can host cultural organization and cultural activities again. So the concept is to have a central drive that would retain some of the historic fabric and understanding and identity of the circle, and to extend that into a larger public commons. So think Savannah, Georgia, think the public greens of more historic cities in Philadelphia or Boston. The intent is to create effectively a public space. Let me see if I can get there we go. To create a public space where both residents can look out onto and the public at large could visit and feel free to move through. So with that as the centerpiece and heartbeat of this particular proposal, we would propose row housing or brownstones, or depends on the terminology. It depends on the city and jurisdiction you'd be in that you'd hear it. But think brickstones, or something that has a porch, something that has a setback, and something that has a tree-lined roadway. So that would face the interior public commons, or the green. And then we would have on the south, we'll start here. We would propose, again, similarly massed as facing the interior. So multifamily housing, well, they'd actually be townhomes or individual units, but they're grouped together to create 4 units per block. With, in this case, we're seeing garages addressing the alleyways. So again, this would serve as an alleyway through, just like you see in the historic district. And the public street to the south would have a large setback. Similarly, along this route, we would have large setbacks with alleyway for the garages. So none of these have street-facing garages. That's a really critical component to this design. It says a second layer, and I'll show a map that explains this in greater clarity. We also have to the north and to the east single-family housing. So the idea here is we have some key restrictions on this particular site. One being the neighborhood to the east, the property line is a grassy field at this point, and there needs to be some respect of that. And so the intent here is to create lots that are equal to or approximate of the adjacent lots. So you can see these lots here. These are skinny, much like this one and this one. And so it's something common to the neighborhood. And the idea is that we have, again, a respect of that neighborhood. Similarly to the north, my handle here, We have single-family housing so that this street maintains that fabric that we see to the west and to the east and to the north. Again, there's the country club to the northwest, essentially an open space. And so the intent is that that northwest portion of the site is open, again, to receive pedestrians, bikers, et cetera. So in this map, in this diagram, what we're seeing is then our proposed phasing of this project. So I've outlined the uses of these, and you can see now phase one, the green phase. If you're colorblind, my apologies. But in the green phase, that would be phase one. So the intent is we could execute phase one, and we would have this vision completed. That leaves then the remainder of land. So depending on the market demand, we could either expand upon higher density levels, or we could maintain the current proposal, which is phase two would be a second wave of those townhome brownstones, brickstones. And then the third identity would be the single family, which could be sold off during the execution of this development. So those parcels would be sold to individual homeowners. And so this, I think, helps explain the intent of phase one, phase two, and then simultaneously there'd be the single family. So we have hired, and you're now seeing the fruits of the labor of Dennis Reynolds. He's an accomplished urban designer, and he has illustrated this vision to a degree that those previous diagrams just hint at. So what we're seeing is, again, the row housing which surrounds the public commons. We're seeing to the northwest an open area. This is a very large site, as you can see from the original map, the amount of parking that was previously on the site. There will be a lot of water drainage. The site tends to drain to the northwest. There's a large slope across the site. So the intent is that we would have effectively areas to receive that water, and those could likely be planted in native plantings and could also host something like a pedestrian path or bike paths. And it sounds like there is a plan as just identified, which would move along East Alta Vista. So the intent is that, given your presentation not 30 minutes ago, this could serve as a trailhead to that trail. This public commons is intended to be something that extends to the neighborhood. The intent is not to create a gated community. The intent is to create something that is open and breathable. So in doing so, this would be a publicly available roundabout, so to speak. It'd be single direction. And this is a public yard with gathering spots at the west and the east. You'll also notice that there is a pathway through two sets of proposed townhomes, and you can see that that path even has a terminal point across this street. So the east is the proposed single-family housing. The west is a more dense development. And the intent is that if a neighbor who lives to the east or a neighbor to the west is out walking their dog, or if they're out for a stroll, or if they're out for a bike ride, they can ride through the project to the other side, down and around, or down and through. The idea is that there are moments with perhaps, moments of public art or points of interest or public seating, things that allow people to engage the outdoors and the environment, that those would be available throughout this site. Again, the intent is to make something that is applicable and appropriate to the community where this is being built. So here we're zooming out. You can see the proposed development as illustrated by Dennis Reynolds in its context. You'll notice that the densities are very similar to the densities to the west, albeit a bit more, and that the single-family housing starts to taper down to touch to the east and to the west, or sorry, east and to the south. So what we're looking at here is a view from the northwest looking to the southeast. So this would be that drive, the roundabout, and then this is illustrating what that density or street facade starts to feel like. Again, the intent is to create something that's very walkable and has nice setbacks with a tree canopy. So you can see that there's healthy setbacks on each side. This, again, is a very large plot of land. And the intent is that this northwest zone acts as a beautiful buffer and entry point into that new development. Here what we're seeing is a cross section. So it is cutting, if you can track this red line, it's cutting a section through this direction looking east. So you can see here, this is the public commons. This is the street. This is the street. And this is that setback that we're talking about with trees and plantings to soften the street facade. This is a conceptual elevation of what those townhomes, brownstones might start to look like. Again, there's no material determination at this time. The intent is to create something with a very residential feel and scale, but also something that feels a little more urban. Again, something that you might find in Philadelphia or Savannah or something of the ilk. So these are conceptual images just showing the variation in that typology. So we have on the top left image here something that's a little more squared, something that doesn't have a sort of the typical roof pitch. Down here is something extremely contemporary, right by sort of the opposite. To the top right, again, something with variation in color and materials. And to the bottom right, we have something that's a bit more classical. The intent is just to show that this can adapt to what the community really needs. We're not trying to say it has to look exactly like this. This is merely an illustration of what the scale and density starts to look like. We'll jump back one. Again, this is addressing having front porches that face the public green and front porches that face the surrounding neighborhood streets. The intent here is we intend to make this a walkable and pedestrian-friendly neighborhood, much like its historic district to the west. To the top right, we have variation in materials and planted streetscapes and public-private areas, right, so that the owner of the particular unit would have that porch, but it would also be open for visitors to walk through, much, again, like historic settings you would find in older American cities. So the last couple of images here just identify the intent is to make this affordable in the sense that a homeowner here who wants to perhaps downsize or perhaps is starting out, that they can move into something that is approximately 12 to 1,500 square feet where they're not having to buy something at 3,000 square feet. And that they can live in this place. They can perhaps rent or own one of these units. And again, the intent is to make it so that we can have a community of people who perhaps otherwise couldn't downsize to a purchased unit. Here we're looking at different collages of imagery for landscape. This was assembled by Dennis Reynolds, the urban designer. So what he's looking at in each of these, this is having to do with a tree-lined urban setting. Each of these is sort of addressing different topics and concerns. This has to do with how the trees relate to perhaps public walkways. This is perhaps there are clumps or gatherings or groupings of trees that create focused canopy sections. This section here is looking at having variation in planting types that address concerns with water and soil health, but also have points of interest. You can see the gathering circle here. It's a bit more contemporary. There's nothing that says the design needs to be that. The intent is that we're observing some of the ideas that make healthy and beautiful spaces. In these two slides here, we're looking at porches, setbacks, and raised stoops. Again, ideas that are present in our current proposal. Dennis is, in this case, observing points of interest, wayfinding, sculptures, public art. Perhaps there are opportunities to partner with the local community college, if not other organizations, to help execute public installs. But the intent is to make this a rallying point for community involvement. Here, these are sort of a bit scattered, but they're all at the urban scale. So here we see maybe there's something like a bocce court. Again, perhaps we want to create points of interest that the public could visit. Excuse me. Whereas, this is something that you might find in a historic town with pass-throughs. Or here, these are public benches in a public setting that are a bit more playful. The intent, again, is that in that public commons or the collection area in the center of the development, that there would be a place that the public can visit and gather openly and freely. With that, I'll open it up to questions. I know I just pummeled you with information, so feel free to let me know if you need any clarity on certain items.
Thank you, James. So, council, questions?
I had one, and my apologies, I should have been keeping up with this closer. I don't know if you can go back to the conceptual imagery, the massing one, which on our book is number 5. I can go back 2 two more.
Oh, bit jumpy. I'll get there.
There it is. Well,
There we go.
that one. And looking at these, the way I understand this, the units then to the north and to the east, those would be single family.
Correct. This illustration, I think,
Right.
identifies that a
Okay.
little simpler.
Single family. And then I don't know whether you townhouses or row houses are in the same vernacular. Are those the ones the homes that are then interior to the north and south roads that cut through the development?
Correct. So
Definitely
I'll
green
actually
ones?
move to this slide because I think it's
Okay.
a bit clearer here.
Right.
So this road east-west and this road east-west are alleys. Those are for garage parking. So the vehicle could pull in and park. Dennis Reynolds has illustrated with different planting strips, and you can even see their garage setbacks. So the intent of that is so that it doesn't feel like you're getting a repetition of garage door, garage door, garage door. So just to clarify, in his illustration, these are garages. In this particular unit, again, this is all conceptual. These are attached garages, but again, rear entry. And the same thing up here with rear entry. So this alleyway is for vehicular traffic, whereas this can also have single way, again, as illustrated, one-way vehicular traffic with side parking, parallel parking, and these would all be fronted with housing. So direct access, porch access, housing.
Okay. So the
answer your
red
question?
units are also housing units.
I'm sorry,
well.
could you repeat that?
The ones you have colored in red, those are housing units. Those are not the typical single family though, correct?
Correct. That is correct. So
That's my
as this diagram outlines, so
Right.
what's this showing is if you look at the larger massing are the gathering of, in this particular drawing, that's identifying 3 units with 3 garages behind. So an isolated garage
see.
structure. Does that answer your
That
question?
does. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Matt.
You're welcome.
If I may, James, when you started, or I guess when Doyle started the presentation, you were kind of giving us some past history that several of us are aware of. But myself, not being a professional nor the media, I thought it's interesting that so from back in the day when you came up with the original proposal and you being the experts, you've determined that that just would not work. So now this is something you're sharing with us that you think still using that same area could be developed and be developed on a nice high scale through the examples you've given us.
That is correct.
Okay.
Again, Justin Doyle, Blackbird Investments. When we entered the project, when we met with the city for the very first time, the stated goal was the saving of St. Joseph's Hospital. I know even at the time that was perhaps it wasn't universally felt by everyone in the community as a group that we prefer the saving of historical structures when possible. That was definitely our first goal. And so when we dove into that, we did our very first estimating run within a few months. I think it was summer of 14 that we had our first set of numbers back on a conceptual plan, and it penciled out. We then authorized our architectural firm, Walker Cohen Lawrenson, who's done some really great work in Ottumwa here elsewhere, to carry it all the way through bidding documents. And so we actually, for those of you who are associated with different building trades here in Ottumwa, we had quite a few local contractors end up estimating that. And when those final numbers came in with the final design, with the final environmental information about what the existing building we had to deal with, that's the numbers almost doubled in the course of that. And it's not double as in like go from 40,000 to 80,000. It's like going from 11 million to 22 million. So there was a very, very large dispatch between where this whole thing was going and where it ended up going. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that the existing structure and working with the tax credit agencies, the State Historic Preservation Office specifically, and what it would take to qualify for historic tax credits for that structure that would therefore make it viable became extremely expensive. And the compromises that were having to be made in order to live within the tax credit programs that would therefore make the program viable started becoming more and more onerous to a point where I have to make a decision from a firm standpoint. This is not something that I walked into Ottumwa and talked to Ottumwa about. This is a change. And so if given the alternative of trying to frankly rehabilitate a hospital that still feels like a hospital and then convince people that this is going to be one of the nicest places to live in all of the county, versus let's get realistic here and build a product that is very easily justifiable from an expense standpoint, something that helps change the entire neighborhood feel, and something that can be done without those surprises and a reliance on outside entities like the State Historic Preservation Office or federal low-income housing tax credits, and do this in a market rate solution. That was where we headed. That's a great question. This thing has been in our office for a very long time, and we've been pushing and pulling in every different direction.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, questions?
So you had mentioned right at the offset, one of the bottlenecks that you have is obviously this is not your property. It belongs to Ottumwa Regional. Without getting too specific, where are you at with Ottumwa Regional in negotiating out that property?
Actually, TJ would be the best one to answer this.
Yes. Hi, TJ Jacobs, Blackbird Investments. With regards to where we're sitting within this transaction or through the negotiation, this past year, knowing that we had challenges with the redevelopment, we pursued a new concept. What you're seeing here is evidence of this. We've also paralleled path with what the pursuit of a demolition and abatement cost would be. We've provided that information to Regional Care. So, as we have proposed a new concept, we've also provided all the details and costs associated with the demolition and the abatement. We're working with Regional Care to work through how we will team and partner on a successful transaction here. But right now, we're waiting on Regional Care to come back to us.
Okay, thank you. Matt, Skip?
Just a comment that, we're all very glad that you folks are back. It's good to hear that you're still highly interested in Ottumwa. We have a lot of people that ask us. I hit people weekly that say, where are we at on St. Joe? What's going on with St. Joe? So thank you for moving forward on this, and we're glad you're back.
I appreciate that very much. Oftentimes, I'm not exactly a very sympathetic character, so when I read things in the paper, I've grown a pretty thick skin over time. What I'd love to be able to have everyone know and understand is what the actual facts of the situation are, and I think that really helps frame the conversation. When you have a communication with a neighbor or a citizen about that, what I'd love to follow up with that comment, if I could be so bold, is to say that Blackbird doesn't just do projects in cities, we do communities. And so this is not just a one and done. We look around, we drive around on the way in, we spent time touring different neighborhoods. Our single family home division, Blackbird Neighborhoods, would fit, which is actually the predecessor to Blackbird Investments. We have a great deal of interest in working in focused neighborhoods in order to try to turn some of the economic tides around and to deal with some of the really difficult properties that maybe have been abandoned, stuff that is probably in need of demolition. As a private developer, that's the type of thing that we do, and we've had great success in Waterloo, Cedar Rapids, north side of Des Moines, east side of Des Moines. And so I look at all these things as interest. I look at downtown, and Ottumwa is ripe for opportunity. But one thing that has eluded Ottumwa up until just the last few years ago is the precedence it takes to see the outside investment happening there. And the very first time we ordered an appraisal for the apartment building for the rehabilitation of the St. Joe site, we get the full market study back. It was basically an analysis of every single rental property within about 5 miles of the location, which basically covers all of the area. To see the rental price points of where they were and the general condition of some of those buildings, and to compare to what we're proposing here, what we were proposing at the St. Joe site is head above a lot of the quality, vast majority of the stuff that's available, because we want to attract the people that right now might be looking at leaving Ottumwa at night to go home to a different community than drive back in the morning because of the great jobs that are here. So it's not that there aren't people who are willing to move into a very nice place and to pay a slightly higher rent than what is typically found in the area. It just takes someone to jump in and do it, to prove that the demand is there. Because until someone proves that the demand is there and proves that those rents can be met, the only thing outside investors will look at the city of Ottumwa, and they'll look at the average of the different apartment buildings that are around and see what they charge, and they work out their math, and they realize, I can't afford to build there. And I'm guessing you're nodding because you probably said this about 1 million times to anyone who listened to you. Yeah, that's right. And so that's what makes, and I kind of generally alluded to that at the beginning, that's what I enjoy about what Blackbird does and the opportunities and being able to work with communities like Ottumwa, because this is a catalyst project. And by showing that this can be done economically and the market will support it here in Ottumwa, it'll attract other people to do the same thing. And I don't want to be the one guy who's only going to build things in Ottumwa for you guys. I want there to be a bunch of developers. I want there to be a lot of outside investment coming into this county and this city in order to be able to instigate the type of development that you guys drive from a political standpoint. But there needs to be that first item to jump down there. And that's why we're not giving up, is because it will happen. And I hope ours is the first, but in the event that somebody else comes in and does a really nice market rate first project to prove this, then it'll actually make my job easier. So if somebody else wants to step up and do it, hey, I'm all ears. But in the meantime, I'm in it for the fight. So
Thank you.
I think it looks absolutely beautiful. I think some of the hard realization, with this town is we got a lot of ties to our historic structures. And in the past, we've demolished a lot of those historic structures. And, fast forward 20 years, and now we realize what devastation that was, because now they're highly valued in the community. But on the other hand, it's a struggle. It's a hard one to call, because when you have a building that is not going to be rehabilitated or is not cost effectively going to be rehabilitated by anybody, you have to face the realization that, what are the other options? And I was glad to see you guys come back. I was getting a little nervous, to be quite honest with you, about where we were headed, but I'm glad to see you back here. I absolutely love the design, almost better than the old. And so I didn't think I'd say that, but that's absolutely amazing work you guys have done. And so I hope it works out. I hope we get through it and we get to the actual construction point and phase. And I know we're a long ways off, but keep us informed as we go along. And you certainly have my support. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Andy, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Mr. Mayor, just one question on this, and if this is a bit speculative and quite frankly is not the place to field a question like this, but in talking about price points, when you look at the single family homes, can you give a ballpark figure then of what these likely would be in terms of a price range?
We've run a variety of different scenarios. And with single family homes, you can move the lever to what level of quality, for instance, granite versus P-laminate and all those different items. But we feel very comfortable that we can build very nice property in here for $200,000 at retail price per unit. And if the market's steady and there's a demand for it, that we'd be happy to go much higher than that. At $200,000 a unit, there are a lot of comparable homes that are already on the market in the area. So I know there's a built-in demand for that in Ottumwa. You can go to Zillow.com and see that immediately. What I think the question mark will be is, as we move forward, and if we're able to succeed in securing the site and the clearing of the site and such, is that there'll be a series of listening sessions on our part to find out what is the community looking for? What are the employers in town looking for? What is the mix of rental versus purchase, or maybe it's a conversion of rental to purchase? And to sit down with the human relations or human resources department for each of the major employers and help solve their problems they have. Because that's, from an investment standpoint, that's the best thing I can do in order to have this thing get absorbed quickly and to have a product that meets what people are looking for.
Thank you, Mayor.
Could I just add to that very quickly? Again, just to reiterate, this is a conceptual plan. And this conceptual plan is built on the existing assumptions and conditions as issued by the appraisers, right? So again, as the market conditions shift, the ability to build with quality and or quantity would also shift.
How many acres is the general commons? I know you're talking about Savannah, beside Parkinson's.
Sure. Right. Sure. So the total acreage of the entire property is approximately 10 acres. So per scale, again, it's not measured. So the number I'm about to give you is not accurate. And again, it's conceptual. So with those variables in mind, it's approximately, I would say 0.75 to 1 acres as drawn. That doesn't include then the northwest walkable space, which would approximately double that.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
I'm sorry. One more item.
Yes.
Councilor Dalby, you'd made reference to wanting and looking forward to us coming back. What I'd love to do is take this opportunity, and I appreciate the time that I'm consuming of everyone's weeknight, but to encourage any type of support that you can give towards a transition of that site to development hands and the clearing of it. That's the single largest thing that we can do, and I'd love to engage the city of Ottumwa, not in waiting to update you guys and tell you what we're up to, but let's lock arms and work towards making this a reality sooner rather than later. I know these things take time. We're not going anywhere. I'd love to be able to have an excuse to come down here and talk to you guys every month. And so I'm looking forward to that. But in the meantime, please, I'll take any volunteers to help with that.
Okay, thank you, Blackbird, very much, all of you. And that is a good point. And I know we as a city do want to work with you. So we appreciate this information and we look forward to working with you in the future. Okay, I guess at this point, if there are persons in the audience that would like to speak on on something other than what was on the agenda, you're welcome to step forward.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Sharon Stroh. I represent the Ottumwa Economic Development Corporation. I was not planning on having any remarks, so I don't have any data with me, but I would just like to refer to the Blackbird investment piece that we just heard. And I will tell you that most economic developers across the nation know that housing drives retail. And if there is ever a time that Ottumwa could use more retail, it's now, when we are clearly looking at filling empty buildings that have been vacated by some of our long-term retail establishments such as JCPenney and Target. So if I could just give you that anecdotal information, I would like you to carry that along with you as you think about how this project is moving forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to the council?
Good evening, Council. Brad Lodel with the Legacy Foundation. I just want to take a moment for a PSA on behalf of the canteen and the alley. Today, barricades were set up and construction has started on phase 2 of the Canteen Alley project. So I want to thank the city for contributing to that, and the Legacy Foundation and others, and we're excited about that. However, construction will limit accessibility to the canteen, the Stitch Doctor, and some others that are along that alley and along Main Street. So if you can encourage your colleagues and others to have lunch there and loose meat sandwich, we would love for you to do that. But I also want to thank the city and Larry Seals, Brett Douglas with Genus Landscape Area 15 for bringing this project to life, and especially for accommodating the parking on the second floor of the parking garage for those folks that normally would have parked along the alley. So thanks for accommodating us. And we hope to be cutting the ribbon on that sometime around Thanksgiving if we can. So thank you.
And thank you, Brad.
Thank
And
you.
Another good example of a cooperative effort by several entities. So thank you. Anyone else? Okay, not seeing anybody else come. I want to thank Sherry Jones for sitting in for Amanda as clerk. Thank you. And then City Administrator Andy, we have another special meeting next week.
That's correct.
the
Yeah,
29th.
thank you, Mayor. There will be a meeting a week from tonight, I should say, the meeting on the 29th. At that meeting on the 29th, there will be 2 topics that will be discussed. Bob Jay, our finance director, will give an overview of the year-end 16-17 fiscal year budget. In addition to that, both he and I, primarily myself, will also be discussing staffing at the fire department. That'll be, again, the evening of the 29th, a week from this evening.
Okay, thank you. To entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Sherry?
Councilmember Myers,
Yes.
Councilmember Rowe,
Yes.
Councilmember Stevens,
Yes.
Councilmember Dalby.
Yes.
We are adjourned.
Good time.